So I guess we should get started. When we envisioned this panel, I talked to Sterling about what would we talk about if we had the opportunity to talk. And I should tell you, I'm Ted Van Alst. I'm the co-chair of Native American Studies here, if you forgot who I was. So we were talking about, what do we do and what do we talk about? And we take questions from the audience, And there's always a sort of, I have to quote Sterling. People go, so where do you get your ideas, or what do you do when you can't write? Or, those sort of pat questions that I think writers sometimes struggle to answer and maybe have pat answers. And so what I guess I really wanted to know, and these guys are way better writers than me, so this will probably be the most that I talk. You really want to hear from them. What I wanted to know, and I thought we would talk about is, the title is Tales from the Side of the Road, right? And where does that come from? So I think all of us who've written, or I hope all of us who've written, have had that moment, where you're going to work and you're late for work and you're driving and you're not paying attention, you're drinking your coffee and you're going, and the story is like, and it won't stop, right? So you have to pull over the side of the road at the gas station or next to the ditch or whatever, and you write it down, whether it's on your phone or you got a piece of paper. The conclusion of my dissertation is on a napkin from Subway, right? So you never know. And so what I want to know is, what do you do when you can't do anything but write? Where does that come from? When you're utterly compelled to write. And I think that's what interests me. So we want to talk about that tonight. I'm hopeful too that the other thing we talked about was we've been working around this sort of the native lit renaissance, right? We're looking after ceremony. Somebody mentioned ceremony earlier, and so it's 2015, and we love our elders. We love all those books, and those books had to be. But where are we at now? What are we doing now? Can we move beyond this? And if we do, what does that look like? And, teaching the class here, I know I got students here. Thanks, extra credit all around. Yes, woo, give it up for the students. On a Friday night too, right? So we want to, what does that look like? And if we have students, because we all teach, who are writing in that vein, that sort of, I hate to say that, like high 1980s, that like, the corn pollen and the feathers and all of those kind of things that, that had to get out there, that had to get written about. But where are we going now? So we want to talk about a couple of things. What do we do when we're compelled to write and we can't do anything but write? And can we share a little bit about that? And then we want to look at where native writing is going. We're native lit, and what is native lit? And maybe work to get a couple of definitions in there. And I think that's all we want to do. Does that sound okay? You guys up for that? Yeah? All right. Awesome. So I have the absolute pleasure of introducing these two guys. And we've worked together before, so they're probably going to make fun of me, and that's cool. I'm down with that. Whatever, for a laugh. But no, I get to introduce Stephen Graham Jones. Wow, Stephen Graham Jones is here. That's fucking awesome. So, he is the prolific author of 16 novels, a couple hundred short stories. He's been published in everything from, Black Warrior Review to, Dzanc Publishers. There's Lazy Fascist Press. Everybody's got his books, right? And I suggest you get his books too. We have a new collection of his work out from the University of New Mexico. It's around here somewhere, The Faster, Redder Road, which I really like. And Stephen was so generous in putting that together. So he's come here for a visit. And Sterling Holy White Mountain is here too. He's teaching up at BCC right now, working in the writing program. Stephen is a professor of English and creative writing, is that right? And werewolves, right? Are they letting you do that? It's on the door now, I think, so that's kind of cool. And he's down at Colorado, Boulder. So sort of a Western flair. We were working earlier to rewrite the Western narrative, and if I can think of two writers right now, you know, as a professor of literature that I find exciting, that are doing really incredible work with form and with voice and all of that cool stuff that we really like about writing, it's these two guys. So I'm really excited to have them here. So if you guys want to come out and we'll start talking. That's Sterling. That's Steven. All right. So you guys are going to have to do some adjusting. Shouldn't there be a table here? This is so weird. It's like a one-act play. We're on the bus, right on the big Greyhound bus. And usually on the Greyhound bus, anybody here take a Greyhound? It's awesome, right? You meet awesome people. If you need stories, it's usually warm beer in the back of the bus. Somebody be like, hey, so that's cool. Diet Coke, all right. Dr. Pepper, even better, all the way around. Shh, conformity. All right, so.
I don't think this is on, actually.
It's just not close enough, Holmes.
Test. Oh, yeah,
there you go.
Gotta get a little too close.
He's doing the right thing. Much better. All right. So, yeah. So Sterling was writing stuff. So I think since him and I talked about this so much, why don't we start with you? And I think it doesn't matter. We can either talk about the compulsion to write, or we can talk about your student and what do you do with the student who's still writing in this sort of high Renaissance style.
Well, I feel like the question regarding that, I think we should probably actually. There might be people here who I can't actually see any of you, and I feel like that's a good thing because I walked through. The audience a little bit, and I'm a little disappointed in how that there are more good-looking people in the audience right now. And so right now, the fact that I can't see most of you, I feel good about that. I feel like you should probably actually define what Native American Renaissance literature is, because there may be people here who don't really, before we go off on a...
He's a full professor. So the question is, give us a definition of the Native American literary renaissance.
Oh, it starts with Mama Day, comes up to right before Alexi, I would say. And it's kind of fiction that starts with someone outside the community and they work their way in, and that's the happy story. The story of, that's the redemption of the story, I guess. Is that too quick? Does that work?
The return. Some authors.
Mama Day, Welch, Silko, Erdrich. Those are four of the titans on the scene, anyways.
Ortiz.
Yeah, Ortiz.
That work? Okay. And the chronological time is like what, 68 to right before tracks, maybe?
Yeah, maybe the mid 80s, I would say.
I think since Steven's done a lot more teaching than either one of the other two of us, the question, well, for what it's worth, Steven did a pretty incredible, I guess, talk, or read a pretty incredible list at the Institute of American Indian Art, IAI, Institute of American Indian Arts, a couple weeks, a month back, and it's up on YouTube and Vimeo now. And anybody who's interested in this question of what it is, what exactly it is that American Indians are supposed to be doing when they're writing, should go watch it, because I watched it one time and I thought two things. I thought, one, that fucker said everything I wanted to say myself but didn't say publicly. And two, I'm glad he said it because it means now I don't have to say it. But it's really, he said really important things in there. And one of the things that he addresses is the idea that, or not the idea, but the fact that if a younger, I believe the title is, what's the title? I can't remember. It's
Letter to a just starting out Indian writer, and maybe to myself.
Yeah, it's really excellent. And I think in some ways it applies to this larger issue in the U.S. right now, that this idea that artists are supposed to be meeting the various, are supposed to be pleasing for some reason the agendas of people who are involved in social justice movements, and he addresses that also. And so in that way, I think it applies far beyond the bounds of what the question of what exactly it is that Indians are supposed to be writing. But one of the things he said in there is that if somebody is still writing in that sort of Renaissance, Native American Renaissance style, that it suggests that nothing has happened since then, which is basically like nothing since the mid-'60s, and that we haven't progressed or moved beyond that. And what I was thinking while I was watching that is, what exactly do you do in the case of if you come across somebody who's doing that, and that person is your student? Do you do you have like a serious one-on-one talk about this, or do you let that student do you set up an intervention, or do you just let that person write their way through that if they will? But then what followed that is, because I'm usually of the mind that that a writer is going to write what they're going to write until they don't write it anymore. But the problem with that is that works a little bit better for non-Indians than it does for Indians, because there's always this question with us of, there's a certain way to write, so that, for lack of a better way to put it, there's a certain way to write so that white people respond to you better than others. And that Renaissance style is so familiar that at this point in time, that it's palatable for non-Indians in a way that something that would be more quote-unquote insider might not be. And so there's always the chance that, because you're a writer and you want people to pay attention to what you're doing, that when non-Indians start paying attention to what you're doing, there is that question that I have, is are you am I, or are you actually writing things consciously or unconsciously writing so that non-Indians have an easier time understanding what the hell it is you're talking about? And so my question for you, Steve, is what would you do with a student who was doing that? How would you deal with that?
I think I would, either individually or as a class, as a group, I would interrogate that student, maybe not that student specifically, but I would just pose some sort of interrogation. That sounds kind of hostile, doesn't it? I would ask some questions. I would say, because what I want from any piece of writing is sincerity, and so I would ask questions that probe at the motivations for still addressing issues that have already been addressed. And I would guess that 70% of the time, what's going to be the answer is that's the stuff they're currently reading, Silko and Welch and Momaday, and they're reading that stuff from back there, and they're imitating what they see, because they think that's how you get the key to get into the good place, onto the shelf. And hopefully they would hear their own answers and realize there's maybe another way to do it, where you just write what is real to you, what actually matters. But the issue is, what if that is what matters to them, of course, And in that case, let them go. Like you say, people are going to be the writer they're going to be, we can accelerate that process, but, and we can probably, I really don't think we can shut it down. I think any writer that I tell to stop writing, if that writer stops writing, then they should stop writing, So I don't really worry about that.
Do you need me to moderate, man? He's got a big list.
Anybody that knows me knows that I take long pauses, and that doesn't always work very well.
He's pre-eldering.
Outside of like a meeting, where you're sitting down inside a lodge, or maybe a tribal council meeting. But in a situation like this, long pauses don't do very well so often. There are two things. One of the things that you talked about in that, I'm going to refer back to that video of your list. That letter that you wrote to the young Indian writer, or maybe to yourself. several times because I felt like you hit on some really key things as far as what it is that American Indian writers are dealing with. And one of the things that I thought about, and I've always thought about, is there are two stories. Well, one of them I was there, so it's not. I guess it's not a story, but the other one was something that somebody told me, and they're both Jim Welch quotes. And back when I had first started writing fiction and had realized that I had this, disease known as, fiction writing, and and I was in a class that used to exist here, and I don't think it does anymore, and it was a really great class, and anybody out there who has the power to do so might want to revive this. And it was a class called Montana Writers Live, and every week, it was just on Monday afternoons for a couple hours, and every week another writer would come in and basically read some of their stuff and talk about writing with the students, and we could sit there and ask questions with them. But it was the only time I've ever been in a situation where, I guess a professional or established writer would just come in and sit down and be open to questions, from other people who are interested in writing. I've never really seen that anywhere else, and because even in workshop you don't have time to do that. You're really critiquing stories, and then workshop's over with, and everybody leaves, and that's it. So it was a pretty special situation, and Welch came in, and at that time I didn't really know who he was. I kind of knew who he was. I'd never read any of his stuff, but he was also the first Indian writer I'd ever been in the same room with, and he read some of his poems, I may have, and part of Winter in the Blood, I think. No, sorry. He read part of Heart Song of Charging Elk. And somebody asked him, because the question with this is always like, if you're a non-Indian, can you write about Indians, And there's a political side to that question, which is that, non-Indians have been writing about Indians forever, and and a lot of times they've fucked it up. And the writer's side of that question is like, it's a really complicated issue, right? It's difficult because you don't want to put people in a situation where you say that, like, well, you can't write about this, and you can only write about this, and then you're stepping into a different kind of politics. But Welch's answer was like, well, he said, my philosophy regarding what you can write about has always been that anybody should be able to write about whatever they want. And that being said, if you're not an Indian and you've never been around Indians, you're going to write about Indians, you're probably not going to do it very well. And that was something that I heard probably 16 or 17 years ago, and it's really stuck with me because what it sounded like to me was it was what I realize now, but I didn't know then, is fundamentally a writer's perspective. It was a writer giving himself and everybody else he knew that wrote, regardless of who they were, their background or ethnicity, the freedom to write about what they needed to write about. But he also, the caveat is that be prepared. If you're going to write about something you don't know anything about, you may very well face some pretty heavy criticism. So there was that moment, right? And then there was another thing that I actually heard from the late Darrell Kipp, who started the Blackfoot Language School up on our reservation a couple hours north of here. And he told me one time, he said, I was at a party with Jim Welch, and Jim comes up to me, in the middle of this party, and just looks at me and he says, Darrell, why do I have to be an Indian? Why can't I just be an existentialist? And I really, and I really, really, really loved that, because it felt real and honest to me, but it also speaks to that idea that the external pressure is constant. That if you're going to be an American Indian, you better behave as such, right? And Steve, you actually address that to some degree in your talk, and I wonder, like it's always been curious to me that if you're an Indian, you're not supposed to be an atheist either, and like my late cousin always, he actually wanted to be a Tibetan Buddhist. He wanted to study Tibetan Buddhism. But I always felt like that sort of thing is not really allowed, either by outsiders or by insiders. And what is that? What do you think? What does that mean? What does that mean to you in terms of? Because one of the things that you've done, which I think is really kind of amazing, is you have given yourself the freedom to write whatever the hell you want to write. And that's something that I think a lot of Indian writers struggle with now and are going to continue to struggle with. And like, what is that? Like, what I feel like, what to some degree, that what Welch was talking about is he gave himself that same permission. And what is, like, talk about that. Like, what is that process to get to the point where you can write, you know, the stuff that you're writing?
You know, first I'll talk about, you were talking about your cousin who wanted to study Buddhism. For a while, I thought I wanted to be vegetarian. And I thought it would be cool. I was living in Boulder. Everybody there is like eating caveman diets and stuff, and it made sense. And so it was really like my license to eat nachos and french fries all the time, you know? But after I got over that, I was doing it for like 2 or 3 months. And one of my cousins came down from Montana coming through, and we met in Denver at a Chili's or an Applebee's or something. And he was trying to, he was like flirting with vegetarianism too. And then we got to talking about it, and we said, well, what if, what is everybody going to say, you know? And we couldn't come up with any good reason to be vegetarian, so we both ordered big old juicy hamburgers, and it was over then, you know. But we did give in to stereotypes because Indians are supposed to be meat eaters, you know. And there is definitely that pressure when you're writing. There's all those expectations. Well, you're always asking yourself, or it's not, you're not asking yourself, but you're kind of internalizing the questions you always get asked of who is this for, you know? Like the same way, like you were saying today in your talk on that panel, Sterling, that native writing has been not a conversation between Indians. It's been to non-Indians, you know? And you can see that as early, you know, back in Kajuia when they're footnoting stuff in like an anthropology book or something, you know? And I mean, you can try to buck that all kinds of different ways, but in the final analysis, it's pretty much the non-Indians who are buying the books, you know? And so it's a weird, it's an awkward balancing act where you're trying to sell books and also do what you want to do, you know? But as for that permission you're talking about, yeah, it's something you have to chisel away at and earn, kind of, and then you finally just have to say, screw it, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to do, like, when I was first starting out writing, I would, you know, I'd do a book about, you know, demons or giant caterpillars or whatever, and people would come to these kind of events and ask me, what's Indian about that? And I'd say I wasn't thinking about what's Indian. I was just thinking about I wanted to see a giant caterpillar, you know. But I don't know. Is everything I do Blackfeet because I'm Blackfeet? You know. I mean, probably. I don't. Like when I was first starting out publishing, I was talking with Ted about this earlier. The publishers wanted me. They said, "You're Indian. Why don't you have an Indian name? Why don't you go by your Indian name?" And I said, Jones is my Indian name. You know, I am. I'm Indian. That's my name, so it's an Indian name. You know, and they took. And also, you've probably run into this before, Sterling. Whenever people are doing my biography on the back of a book or contributor's notes in the back of a journal or magazine, they're always like. I see it, and it says Blackfoot, and I say, no, I'm Blackfeet. And they say, no, but you're just one. You're just one Blackfeet, you know? And, but, yeah, I don't know if I really answered your question. Let me think. How do you chisel out that space for yourself to do whatever you want? I think you just keep talking, and you keep talking, and, I mean, keep writing and writing and writing. That's the only answer I've ever had. Is just do book after book after book and don't care about the people who come to your talks and say, so what's Indian about this? You know, I just keep doing it. You know, I just do it and do it and do it and don't ask for permission.
Do you think, you know, because I'm curious to know, you're talking about, you know, using Jones or using, you know, your other family name. What, I mean, because you had to make a decision right then and there when you first started out. And so now, obviously, you're, you know, successful and everything, and you've got some distance behind you. What do you think, or do you think it would be different if you had used your other name rather than Jones when you first started writing.
Yeah, I think it would have sold more books. Calf Looking is a cooler name than Jones, you know, and it's going to sell more books, definitely. And also, when I first started out, I think my first novel, they wanted an author photo, and I didn't want to give them one because I really, really hate that process that readers, consumers, buyers go through, where they pick up a book and they have, for some reason, it looks Indian to them, and they flip it over to look at the author photo to see if it's a real Indian. And I hate that. That's such a reductive way of doing things, so stupid. And so I didn't want to put an author photo on my book. But the press kept calling me and saying, you got to do it, you got to do it. And so what I did was I went down to the park and played basketball, and I had my wife stand way back in the bushes and take like telephoto surveillance photos of me. And I had her do it when I was doing really good too, you know. And I sent those in, and they said, ha, give us something better. And so then I went back, and we had some tan carpet in the front room, and I laid back on the carpet and had my wife brush my hair out all around me in a big ring. And she stood over me and took a photo, and I mailed that in. I thought that was great, you know. And they said no. So then I finally just had to stand up against the wall and take a convict photo, and I sent that in, and they were tired of dealing with me, and they said it was okay. But I should have just subbed in some other photo, you know. That would have been the cool thing to do, I think.
West Studies.
Exactly, yeah.
Do you think, could Stephen Calf Looking write the Elvis Room?
Yeah, that's the question. Could I get into the genres that I get into with my Indian name? I think I could, yeah. Well, I mean, who knows if I got the skills, but yeah, because in science fiction and horror and fantasy, it's not really an issue of where you come from or anything. It's just what's on the page, you know?
Back to you.
So one of the things you were talking about in that in your list was basically you set out a I'm not thinking of the word right now. You basically said that, like, as Indian writers, that we have to demand that our work is viewed fundamentally and first and foremost as art. Mm-hmm. You know, because the idea is always that you turn something in and it automatic. Like the first step is almost always the first step in the you know, the anthropological process is actually to look at the photo, the author photo, right? Mm-hmm. You know, and then you go through this authentication process, and people are going to decide that, you know, determine, like, in some way the value of your work by whether or not you're real or not real according to them, right? And of course, those people really have no idea what the hell they're talking about most of the time, and that was one of the things that you said in there that was where I actually just, you know, I gave you like a fist bump while I was sitting there in front of my laptop, because it's something that I've been thinking about, you know, constantly since before grad school, but even, you know, in grad school, and then particularly after grad school. One of the things that happened to me in grad school is that, you know, at this point in time anyway, most of my stories are most of the stuff I write is really about, you know, our reservation up there, and I'm not writing about that because, you know, I'm trying to be like trying to be an Indian, right? I'm writing about that stuff because, like, that's the shit that I can't get out of my head. And but I still remember the first time in grad school somebody said to me, you know, I just don't. It was, I mean, you know, the value of the story at this point in time, you know, is questionable in terms of quality. But it was the content of the story. You know, I was trying to capture the, you know, a day in the life of a particularly violent, you know, character. And I remember this this girl saying, she's like, you know, I just don't believe anybody could have a day like this, and. And you know, obviously in workshop, at least the ones I've ever been, you know, you're not, as the writer, you're not supposed to talk. You just listen to everybody talk about your work, right? And you're sort of the witness to this debacle. And there were, I got comments like that throughout grad school, you know, and it always came with this an attitude of like, I really just don't know, you know, like it was either that I don't believe what's being conveyed here, not just because, you know, I wasn't doing it well enough, but there was something else going on there, because I probably also wasn't doing it well enough. But also that there was another approach. The other side of that coin was that there was a way in which certain people would actually refuse to engage my work because they felt like they were so far on the outside of, you know, of whatever it is that I was talking about, and they're like, you know, that sort of thing, and I felt like both of those responses were a refusal to actually address my work as first and foremost as art. They were coming at it from, you know, from that, you know, that anthropological angle, and so when I heard you say that, you know, it's a really big deal, because there's on the one hand, I still remember. So when I first got to Iowa, I met this woman through a friend, and she was from Meskwaki, I think. I can't remember. And anyway, and we're sitting down talking, and she says, you know, at some point she says, you know, like, we were talking about the, you know, this thing that I think that, like most, I don't want to say most non-Indians, like I kind of have to say like most white people. I don't know that white people generally deal with this question of like do you feel like feeling a social responsibility to a group of people, and am I allowed to write about people in this way? Like nobody told Bret Easton Ellis, don't say that about your people, right? Like when he wrote American Psycho, people were like, hell yeah. Like nobody, but if you were to write a book about an Indian serial killer, that's always going to be a question that you're going to face, is like what do you think about the effect this is going to have on perceptions of your people? And that's a different set of shackles that you get to deal with as an Indian writer. And I still remember this girl saying, she's like, you know, don't you just hate, like how did she put it? It was like, don't you just hate like everybody at home telling you to go back and help everybody? and I understood what she was talking about, you know, especially like, I don't really know if writing helps anybody. So the idea that, I mean, like I said earlier today, you know, there's this sort of this thing out there where it's like, well, you know, you wrote this book and it's not portraying a certain group of people or a type of person or a situation in the light that we want it to be portrayed in, and therefore, you know, you're a bad person, obviously, and also like you should probably never do that again, ever, you know, but my question is like, when's the last time any of you read a book or watched a movie that actually solved the problem? You know, and like, so where's this idea come from that like if you just write the book the right way, it's going to help like change society? Like that's never happened. And so that's why when I heard you talking about like dealing with this as art, that was a big deal to me, because that question in Indian country is constant. Mm-hmm. You know, what are you doing for your people? What are you doing for your people? What are you doing for your people? And my answer at this point in time has become, I'm being honest, even if that means that they don't like it. Because, and I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and that's actually the best thing that I can do for any of the rest of them. And, but I wanted to, you know, I felt like, what was interesting to me is that you dealt with this from an angle of like, I think from like an artist's perspective, right? Whereas David Troyer, in his book Native American Fiction, in those essays, I felt like he dealt with that issue from a critical perspective, and kind of like tearing down this idea that like Indian writing is supposed to be a very particular way and is supposed to serve a very particular function. And why did you, what was the compulsion to, because you several times in that talk you mentioned that as art, like why did you, that was the thing you emphasized the most?
It's because I am sick of seeing Indian text in the classroom used solely as an ethnographic lens onto a people, and then everybody gets all weepy tragedy eyes and everything, and it's a whole different experience, you know. When I teach a text, I tend to take it apart like you take apart an engine. I want to see how, when this piston fires, why does this other thing happen, you know? And the reason I do that is because when I take it apart, I learn myself how to build a better narrative, how to do this myself, how to make an engine run, a narrative engine run. And it's selfish, definitely. But for me, it's like it's a total pullback on my part, looking only at the boundaries, like the boundaries of the page, I guess. I like to interface art as art, I guess, not as a lens onto something else. I'm sure there's a lot to be learned that way, but I think Indian texts get used like that so much that people stop considering them as good or art. They stop asking, is this good or is this bad? It's considered good because it's Indian, and that's just as bad as saying all Indians are drunks or something. It's essentialism, you know, and we can't let that happen, I don't think. And we've got to resist it in every way we can. And if that involves only writing about giant caterpillars and their friends, then I think that's what we got to do, you know?
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, that like the stories, right? And of course Indians always have stories. Like Indians always have ponies, right? White folks have horses, we have ponies. So Indian stories. So, but the stories do this thing that I see as like cultural porterage, right? So they're like a little porter, like you know, or like a bellhop, the guy with the little red hat on, right? Like Four Rooms, Tarantino and Tim Roth, right? And here he comes dragging oh, just wait, I have a tragic mixed blood and I have a wise elder. Hold on. And so you're listening to this big loud train full of dream catchers and burden baskets and whatever is going on in this book, and you're like, what are the aesthetics of this book? You know, what are we talking about? Where's the story? Tell me something different, you know, because I can get all that, you know, anywhere. Anymore. So I really want to hear the story, and so you worry about that, and that I think is how to extricate your students from writing about that kind of stuff. And I always call it Indianing it up. You know, it's like hanging a dream catcher from your rearview mirror. You know, so what is that? What's happening, and how do we sort of extricate ourselves from that so that we can write about giant caterpillars? Because on the other side of the coin, you have, well, okay, on my res or in my neighborhood, right, I'm from Chicago, these are the horrible things that happen, and we write about these things. And you see it in the world. There was, you know, Disney, ABC did a good program down at IAIA a few years ago with films. And some of the films that these students were making that were coming out of there, they were sending them off to Indian film festivals, and they were getting rejected, right? And I think of two films in particular. One is a film about a medicine man who's a meth head, right? This girl's having all kinds of trouble. Her dorm is haunted, right? She has to have ceremony. She goes out. She gets her grandparents' money, and they go and they find this medicine man. They give him like $400. He's like 100 for each sacred mountain or whatever it was. You know, I don't know. And so they come back. He's like, come back 2 days later, and blah, blah. They come back, and his wife's like, nah, he's high. You know, he took your money, and that's it, you know. And so, but here's the thing. It was a true story. And all of the film festivals rejected this thing. And I was like, holy moly. The other film was this film was made about, there's this non-native couple, and they're in Santa Fe. They're going through a junk store, and they buy an old camera. And the guy takes pictures with it, and they get it developed, right? And in the last frame, it's a picture of a white girl who's taking a picture of herself. She's smiling, and they're like, oh, that must have been a good day. And the backstory is that's the picture she took of herself before she offed herself. Not a very good day for her at all. They rejected it. They're like, well, it's not Indian. And I'm like, the editor, the cinematographer, right, the DP, all of the crew, they're all native. Everybody and the writers except the actors. So is that a native film? Because they seem to think it was a native film. So where we get to giant caterpillars and you know, do we have to strike a balance? Because I want people to just be able to write. You know, we're stuck with all these parameters. So I'm looking for these guys to break those, right? So do it.
The thing that I'm thinking about it, you know, one of my notes here is a reference to something that Louise Erdrich said in her Paris Review interview. And one of the things she says in there is that when she started writing and publishing, she did not want her work to be, she wanted her work to be compared, I don't remember the exact quote, but she basically said, I want my work to be compared to great works of fiction, regardless of where they're from. I don't want my work to be sort of placed over here in the Native American fiction section and just kind of left there, which, one of the fascinating things about growing up in this country as an American Indian is that actually that what you start to figure out eventually is that even many of the most well-meaning non-Indians want to put you on a reservation, and because they have to have some way to categorize you, there's a long history behind that, and I don't really even care to talk about it, but I think everybody has a general idea of what that's about, and that compulsion to in some ways it's very obvious, somebody's a black writer, somebody's an Indian writer, but nobody's ever a white writer, and I've always found that really interesting, and that's except for your class, right? And what happens there, I think, is that the second you take somebody out of the pile and put them over here, I think it's actually part of this process we've been talking about, you no longer have to deal with them on aesthetic terms. You're now dealing with them on anthropological terms. And what Erdrich was saying was she wanted her work, the way I read it, was that she wanted her work to be read first and foremost as art, aesthetically, does this thing work? Is it any good? And the strange thing about outside of the classroom where you have to do a lot of, where you're doing literary analysis, the basic question for a book is almost always did the person who read it, did they like it? And that really doesn't have very much to do with whether or not, who wrote it, and maybe they like it because of the, or what it's about. The question is, did you like it? Did you think it was any good? And for some reason, that question is always either denied, that question is sort of pushed to the side when people are dealing with Indian writers, or, actually a lot of writers now, if you're paying any attention to anything that anybody's saying publicly about any book that comes out at this point in time, the idea of, because maybe that question is too simple for people and people want to make it extraordinarily complicated, and they would rather do some sort of, I don't know, whatever analysis of, this text they do, as opposed to just saying, the fundamental question for me is always well, did you like it or not? Yes or no? And once that question has been answered, then you can proceed. But if you don't start there, then I don't quite know where you're, where it is that you're, why it is you're reading books. And that idea that that Erdrich didn't want her books to be categorized as Indian fiction, basically, and yet that process is continuously taking place anyway, and even if you don't want it to happen, that's out of your hands anyway, because that's just kind of what America does with Indian writers, and that's obviously something that you've dealt with a lot, right? And that's something we've kind of been talking about the whole time. But the question that comes out of that for me is what do we do with this idea? What do we do with this idea as writers, not as academics, but as writers? What do you do with this idea that there is such a thing as Indian fiction? Is there such a thing? I mean, there seems to be, but
I think there is. I think there is. I don't know if we can ever draw a fence around it, but I think there is. And if there is an identifying characteristic to it, it might be what Adrian was talking about today in the talk. When you see somebody who's not Indian writing Indian stuff, and they've done all their Google searches, so they know this date, and they know this word for that word and everything, which is more than I know, for sure, probably. But what'll often be missing is the humor, and I think it's because they don't feel they have a license to use it, or maybe I don't know why. I really don't know why it doesn't show up, but that seems to be the missing thing, But in a larger sense, that's a missing thing from 95% of literary fiction too, because it's easy to be sad. It's hard to be funny, People think that they're getting an authentic reaction if they make somebody cry, but if somebody laughs while they're reading your stuff, they feel like they're just a joke teller. But I think I'd much prefer a joke than a cry session myself,
Want to tell us a story?
Read a story?
You guys want to hear a story?
Yeah, I'll read you a story. I just happen to have a book with me. Hold on. I'll read y'all in my files. Like I sometimes come across this story, and it's called Nipple Doc, and I think I've got to change that, man. That's not gonna look good. All right. Oh, I got to go to the story. Hold on. No, I'm good. I'm good. Thanks. Little short thing. I used to write a lot of little short things like this. This whole book is like 50 short stories. Like Ted was saying, you know, I write a lot of my stuff on napkins, and a lot of these stories I wrote in this book, it's because that's the size of a Bounty Selecta-size paper towel. Because when you have little kids, you've got a lot of paper towels around, man. And I get to the corner of the paper towel, and I'm like, story over, you know. All right, here you go. Neither heads nor tails. My father lost his left nipple in a hunting-related accident. He said it didn't make him any less of a father. It made him more of a man, really. What happened was it was still hot 2 weeks before bow season opened, and he was in the garage in his undershirt, limbering up his favorite bow. After a couple of half draws to get the limbs warm, he pulled the string back all the way, no arrow, and held it for a steady 10 count. On 11, though, his shaky fingers let the bowstring slip. It sliced forward like razor wire. His nipple spun through the air, slapped the wall of the garage, and stuck. The way he tells it, he kind of grunted a smile then. The nerves in his new cavity were still too shocked to relay anything up to his head, and walked directly inside, cupping his hand over his chest to keep the air out. By the time he got a towel and made it back to the garage, which he'd had open, Telly, our dog, was sitting there, sweeping the concrete with his tail. My father could see that what Telly was trying to do was what he always did when he was guilty, gulping down his smile. There was still a wet smear on the wall where he licked the nipple off. It didn't make him any less of a dog, my father says. Really, it made him more of a dog, probably. And it's not like they could have sewn it back on anyway, right? And risk getting it back on, but rotated half around now, like a dial? No, and anyway, my father and his nipple stump. Does it make me any less of a son for staring at it when we're at the beach? Oh, that, my mom says, when she sees the fascination in my face, and then tells my father to be sure and get the sunblock down into that, dear. That's the kind of place a cancer will just pool if you let it. Because it's easier to play along, my father dollops the sunblock in, around, and after it's slick then, and we're all just lying there in the sun waiting to get dry enough for the drive home, I'll sometimes cue into my father's right hand, slapped across his chest like there's a flag in the area, but there's not. And he's asleep anyway, his right finger just skating around the oily rim of his caldera of scar tissue, that divot in his life. What it does, and this is the part I mostly hate, is make me sneak touches up onto my own chest. Sneak touches and maybe even a light pinch, just to be sure. At least until my mom slaps the back of my hand and hisses, "Not in public," to me. It doesn't make me any less of a man, I don't think, but it doesn't help either.
I love Native Lit. So I see you've got your book open. You got something for us here?
Kind of got force-fed to me here.
Did Adrian bring that up?
Yeah,
What are you trying to do?
Adrian's sidekick brought it up. I can read a couple paragraphs.
Okay, because I can read the forward. Jeez, no.
This is a story from Off the Path, Volume 1. It's an anthology series that Adrian Jawort put together. He's from Northern Cheyenne. And this first volume is called, you can't even read it, the cover's so dirty. An anthology of 21st century Montana American Indian writers, Volume 1. Then Volume 2 that came out last year is sort of global, I guess global indigenous, you would say. This is just a short section about, wait now, hold on, say something, Ted, I'm going to find it.
Do you really want me to fill the space while you're looking through a book?
I do.
Holy moly. How are we doing on time? We're good?
Yeah.
Great. 5 minutes?
Oh, I know what I'm.
He knows.
Yeah. What's
Okay.
that?
48 minutes
Oh yeah, I'm
later.
gonna read. I'm gonna read a short section here, and part of the reason I'm gonna read this is because it's about drinking, you know, and people can say that that's stereotypical, but I don't think I'm really approaching it from that perspective. I'm really just trying to talk about, like, you know, what was it, like a condensed version of what it was like to to graduate from high school and see what happened to classmates and friends after I got done with high school. I mean, none of this really happened, but it, you know, in some way it happened. But also, it's this story is called the Education of Little Man False Star Boy, and one of the things that I wanted to address in this book, and it's actually relative to what we've been talking about, because, you know, on the one hand, I really don't think that the purpose of writing fiction is to address issues, even though that seems to be what a lot of people, you know, seem to be saying lately. But I did, you know, but at the same time, like, you know, most people here probably have some idea what a claim check is, and I know where the so what for those of you that don't know, though, a claim check, and this is where people get this, one of the places people get this idea that Indians get free money, you know, which always really pisses me off. And I'm like, yeah, but you got the rest of the fucking country, you know, and you know, and like, considering the, you know, the hundreds of billions of dollars that the land, the remainder of the United States is worth, I don't think a claim check is a really big deal. But even then, these claim checks are things that were issued for a relatively brief time, although there probably still can be issued at some point if there's a quick court settlement. In the case of, you know, when I was growing up, my people around my age, I'm 37 now, when people around my age were the last group of people who got claim checks off the Sweetgrass, what people at home call the Sweetgrass Hills claim. And what it was that, Robert, you're going to have to remind me here, the first treaty that we signed was 1865, and that set the boundaries of, well, no, 855 was the set the boundaries of our original reservation, which was probably close to 2/3 of the state, and then between then and the last, I guess they weren't calling, you know, according to Congress, they're not treaties anymore at this point, but I don't think that's how we felt about it. The last agreement that we actually signed was in 1896, and that was for, you know, the quote-unquote sale or lease, or, you know, something of what is now called, you know, the eastern half of Glacier Park, plus what's the Badger 2 Medicine, which is something that's been in the news a lot. But in between that time, our reservation was reduced multiple times via, was it executive order? Or was it just like Congress saying, like, we're taking that? I don't remember. Okay. So executive order, and basically what that means is that the president, whoever was president during that time, just said, that land right there, we're just taking it. And we're not going to negotiate for it, and we're not going to try to reach any kind of monetary agreement. We're just taking it because you guys aren't using it the way you're supposed to. And what happened in the I believe it was the late 50s was Indian Claims Court, right? So only for a handful of years there was this, Congress set up this thing called Indian Claims Court, and actually shut it down relatively quickly because there were so many claims from tribes that they were like, fuck this, we can't deal with this. You know, but in that time, the Blackfeet tribe was actually able to settle a claim, and that claim was on the executive order that removed the land that is now that we refer to as the Sweetgrass Hills claim, but it encompasses the Sweetgrass Hills, which is actually a very significant geographic formation for us historically, traditionally. And so when that claim was settled, then Congress says, all right, we're going to pay you X amount of money, and it's going to be distributed over time or however it is. And the way that it got worked with us was that in this case was that the money was set aside for a certain amount of, until it ran out basically, and everybody who was enrolled, we're not going to talk about enrollment, but the people who weren't enrolled didn't get this, but anybody who was born during that time that was enrolled would, when they turned 18, they would get what people call the claim check. And it varied, and I never quite understood why it varied, but like some people would get like $20,000 and some people would get like 15, and so that's where this idea, I think, that, well, Indians get free money, well, not really. And so my generation was like, we were like the last ones. I didn't get one because I'm not enrolled, but some of my friends did, and so when they hit 18, I just saw my friends get these huge checks, right? And if you hand $20,000 to an 18-year-old anywhere in the United States, like, what are they going to do with it? They're gonna have fun with it. And so I basically, but also what happened is, like you turn 18, you get this $20,000, you go buy a decent used car and like put a stereo system in it and like drink with your friends, and then like maybe you wreck it, and then $20,000 is gone like that. And that was always a very that's always been a really haunting experience for me. And then later, even before I realized where the money came from, and then later on I realized, what they were actually doing is they were actually spending the Sweetgrass Hills while they were out partying and while they were out driving this used car around. And when that hit me, that was something that hit me in a place that was much deeper and harder to really verbalize. And so in that way, this story is a response to that. And so I guess it's like, it's dealing with like a political or a social issue, but I'm not even going to pretend that like anything I would write could ever and do anything but talk about it, right? And so I just wanted to talk about what I didn't drink then, and so what I saw some of my friends doing and going on around me at that time. And now that I've spent 45 minutes talking about it, I'll read for 5 minutes. Here's what we drank. Boons. Peach for me, strawberry for June, strawberry banana on Tuesdays and full moons. Miller Lite 12-pack, Bud Light 12-pack, Budweiser 12-pack, Mickey's, but only in bottles because they were not sold in cans then. MD 2020 in any flavor they had in stock, although my preference was for grape. The poisonous aftertaste of the cheap liquor was best masked by the artificial grape flavoring. The first time we drank Mad Dog, we had bought 3 bottles, grape, strawberry, and banana. The first 2, our respective choices. The last because, as June said, better get another just in case, June is the woman that the narrator has, I guess we would say, has a thing for. We drove up to Midvale, where all the white people on the reservation lived, and we sat in front of the laundromat just beyond the circle of light projected by the streetlight and drank. The stars blazed. Fuck, this is a weird town, she said. Nothing but white people here. I nodded and drank. You ever wonder what it's like to be white? She said. I nodded and drank. Tommy Davis, a white friend of ours who was cruising around with us that night, who had been in school with us since kindergarten, who had spent almost every day of his life in LaFleur on the reservation, said, "It ain't that great being white." He grabbed the bottle of grape from me and drank. In the half-light, you could see the scar that ran from the right edge of his mouth almost back to his ear. He had a black eye from his latest fight with his older brother. June peered at him through the dark and her drunkenness. "Oh," she said, "I plumb forgot you were white." We laughed and passed what was left of the grape around. The next morning, June called me to ask what had happened to the driver's side door of her Camaro. There was a scrape all the way down the side. Exposed metallic streaks showed through the flames painted on the door. "No idea," I said. "Weren't you the one driving?" she said. "I guess," I said. We laughed. We drank whatever was around wherever we were. That first month of summer, there were keggers every weekend, sometimes during the week. Tire fires lit in the countryside, the cheapest, piss-tasting beer you can imagine, passed out in red or blue plastic cups, emptied and tossed into the dark plains night or into the fire. its forked flames licking the darkness above. The tribal police flashing their lights as they pulled up to the party, kids scattering into the dark, and the hills and the trees like spirits disturbed from their revelry, trailer parties full of kids we'd gone to school with and people we didn't know. Slick city cousins visiting from Seattle, Oakland, Portland, for example. Misty LaCroix's new boyfriend from Tahlequah, one of those pretty Indian men looking like he just stepped out of an ad in a magazine. A drawling Indian with braids and an aura of beautiful invincibility who left Misty and one of her cousins pregnant after only 2 weeks in LaFleur. For example, Londa Williams, Ron Fitz's cousin from Calgary, who for all of 3 seconds sat alone and beautiful as a dark star on a couch at Tiny Cardinal's house party before 3 guys were around her, like bees around a flower, and my chance to speak to her was gone. For example, my cousin Calvin Killslast, who had lived most of his life in the Berkeley area and brought with him all the city cool that drove more than a few, including me, to accuse him of acting too good. That's a Blackfeet thing. I don't know if like other people know, it's like, quit acting so good. An accusation that was ended following his smoking a bunch of us out till people were teasing each other about being more Asian than Indian. And also when a few nights later he'd gotten into a fight with Roland Schultz and managed to take him to a draw. I drove them both to the ER, Calvin's broken nose and Roland's broken and cut up hand bleeding all over my seats, even though both of them had taken their shirts off in an attempt to stop just that from happening. Calvin holding his bunched up shirt to his nose, Roland wrapping his shirt around his hand. Calvin's last words to me before he went back to California, never to return. Calvin, who looked so much like our great-grandpa Yellow Strong Bull Ribs, you felt sometimes, at moments, you were talking to a ghost. Calvin, who would make something of a career for himself as a bit actor in films needing, italics, Native American-looking actors. Fuck all you resers, he said, when me and our cousin Vance lost his gun, dropped him off at the Silver Falls airport. You're a bunch of ignorant pricks. The first person from our class to die was Arnell Reeves. He passed out at the wheel one night on the way back from a bar just off the reservation in Blood Creek and rolled his uncle's truck 8 times before being thrown through the windshield. He died en route to IHS. He was sober. The next person to die was Shirley Red. I can't remember her last name. Everyone had always called her Shirley Red or Cheryl Red or Red. Her hair was black. When she and her friends rolled her truck outside of LaFleur going west on their way to Star School. The other 2 girls riding with her broke ribs and forearms and whatnot. One was severely concussed and the other was briefly in a coma. Her relatives sitting by her in the hospital room that whole week, the room smelling of that odd combination you will sometimes run into at IHS: sage, sweetgrass, sweet pine, leather, cigarettes, antiseptic bodies. Red's funeral was closed casket because of the damage done to her face when she was thrown from the truck. The next to die was Harlan Grass. He was walking along the side road when someone driving around 50 miles per hour swiped him with their door and knocked him into the ditch, where he lay for at least 12 hours in what was probably excruciating pain. His spine snapped and his left ribs, arm, shoulder, shoulder blade, clavicle, and hip bone, hip broken. Any number of people passing him without stopping because, as the woman said who finally stopped, he just looked like some old clothes and some trash way down there in the ditch by the trees. The old men who sat together and drank coffee at the Redbird before it closed in the late 90s in the mornings talked about how awful it must have been for that boy to lay there like that. They discussed the fact that Harlan had been drunk himself. So maybe he had been staggering into the middle of the road himself. Maybe he had not been doored at all. They discussed the similarly tragic deaths of friends and family they still missed from when they were younger. And more than one of them wondered to himself if he would see these same relations and friends in his dreams, as the old people had used to say would happen when your time was drawing close. It was also rumored that the woman who found Harlan must have either been in the vehicle that hit him or knew the people who did it, because how else would she have found him? Way down there in the ditch by those trees. Nothing came of these rumors. Harlan's family denounced the tribal police for being utterly inept, an altogether unnew accusation. After that third funeral in less than a month, I determined in some deep and unassailable part of myself that if I had to die, a fact I was not convinced of just yet, I was not going to die because I was drinking, That night, as a way of saying goodbye to Harlan, me and June and a few others grabbed some Sixers and a few bottles of Boone's and partied in an abandoned trailer way out north of LaFleur. Around 3 in the morning, when the air had become cool from air drafting off of the creek nearby, someone lit the trailer on fire, and though it was not my trailer and belonged to no member of my family, I felt like I had lost a rib. We laughed nervously for a while, and when our worry that the cops would catch us there became too great, we piled into June's Camaro and headed for town. After we had dropped the others off and we were parked in front of my house, June told me Narcissus, that's her man, wanted to get back with her because he realized he had made a mistake and he missed her. Also, it turned out Alana, the woman that he was with in the interim, had been with another guy the whole time, a white guy from Sheraton, who was a champion bronc rider and was 30 years old and had his own ranch and everything. I told June she would be stupid to take him back. He was just going to do the same thing to her again. I told her she should get with me. I would treat her right and we would be happy together. She laughed at me and told me she didn't think of me that way at all. You're my best friend, she said. I can't even imagine kissing you. I leaned over and kissed her. She pushed my face away and told me to get out. I told her I wasn't getting out until she promised that she wasn't getting back with Narcissus. Don't tell me what to do, she said. I'll tell you whatever I want, I said. Who are you right now, she said. The new me, I said. When I got to my room, I lay in bed and counted my money. I put the envelopes with the hundreds I had not spent back under my box spring, and until I fell asleep, I thought about things that had nothing to do with loss or time or misfortune, because in truth, they were as unfamiliar to me as my own face would be decades down the road.
Native lit.